12 years. It feels both like a lifetime and the blink of an eye. 12 years is how long I had been with Delilah. It's the length of time it takes to build what I once believed was an unshakable foundation, a fortress of a life capable of withstanding any storm. We were the envy of our friends, the portrait of modern success, a testament to the idea that love could conquer all, even the messy complexities of a blended family. In those 12 years, I became a father to her son, Leo. He was just 7 when I first met him, a whirlwind of nervous energy, with eyes that held a universe of questions. I was there for his first home run, my voice raw from cheering as he rounded third base, a triumphant grin splitting his face. I was there for his first heartbreak, holding him in the dead of night as he wept over a girl who didn't feel the same, the scent of teenage angst and cheap cologne clinging to his sweatshirt. I was there for his high school graduation, my chest swelling with a pride so fierce it felt like it might burst. I loved that boy as if he were my own flesh and blood. At least, I thought I did. In retrospect, the warning signs were there all along, flashing like garish neon billboards on a deserted highway. But I was driving too fast, too focused on the destination, this perfect life. I was so determined to provide that I chose to look the other way. My dedication to making our unconventional family work was a self-imposed blindness, a willful ignorance of the reality unfolding right under my nose. I was too busy being the provider, the rock, the steady hand that kept our ship sailing smoothly through life's choppy waters. Our home, in a quiet, affluent corner of Connecticut, was the physical manifestation of my efforts. A beautiful 2-story colonial with a sprawling lawn that I made a point of keeping immaculate, its perfect green stripes, a small, satisfying testament to my control over our world. Delilah had exquisite taste, and I spared no expense in creating the perfect nest for us. The kitchen was her domain. Granite countertops, cool and solid, reflected the light from the bay window. Professional-grade stainless steel appliances gleamed, and the wine refrigerator was always stocked with her favorite Chardonnay. It was the heart of our home, where the aroma of her cooking would welcome me after a long day at the firm. The living room was my sanctuary, dominated by a stone fireplace that I made sure was roaring during those brutal New England winters, the crackle of the logs a comforting soundtrack to our evenings. The master bedroom, our retreat from the world, had a small balcony that overlooked the backyard and the dense woods beyond. It was a beautiful life, at least on the surface. But beneath that polished exterior, cracks were forming. Hairline fractures at first, then fissures that threatened the integrity of the entire structure. Leo, now 19 and in his first year at a prestigious university an hour away, had grown increasingly distant. This wasn't the typical, angsty pulling away of a teenager seeking independence. This felt different, calculated. It was a cold, almost hostile withdrawal. His eyes, once so open and full of life, would narrow when I entered a room. His responses to my questions, which used to be a flood of enthusiastic chatter, had been reduced to monosyllabic grunts. If I suggested something, anything, his immediate, reflexive reaction was resistance. The tension came to a head one evening in early October. The autumn air was crisp, and the scent of wood smoke hung in the air. Delilah had made my favorite steak au poivre, and the 3 of us were gathered around the heavy oak dining table. "Leo," I began, trying to keep my tone casual, "have you thought about which classes you're taking next semester?" He didn't look up from his plate. He stabbed at his steak with unnecessary force, the knife scraping against the porcelain. "Why do you care?" The question, so laced with venom, hung in the air between us. I took a slow breath, marshaling my patience. "Because I'm interested in your education," I replied, my voice level. I couldn't stop myself from adding, "and because I'm paying for it." A muscle in his jaw twitched. "Yeah, well, no one asked you to," he muttered, just loud enough for me to hear. Before I could respond, Delilah jumped to his defense, her hand fluttering in the air as if to wave away the conflict. "Elias, he's under a lot of pressure. First year of college isn't easy." This was our dance. The toxic, 3-step routine we had perfected over the past year. Step 1. I would attempt to establish some form of connection or parental authority. Step 2. Leo would reject it with biting disdain. Step 3. Delilah would mediate, but always in his favor. My patience, worn thin from an 80-hour workweek, finally snapped. Delilah, he's 19 years old, I said, my voice tighter than I intended. He can't speak to me like I'm some stranger who wandered in off the street. He's still adjusting, she insisted. Her hand reached across the table, not to me, but to rest on his, a gesture of solidarity that felt like a slap in the face. Aren't you, sweetie? The look they exchanged sent a literal chill down my spine. It wasn't the comforting glance of a mother to her son. It was something else entirely, conspiratorial. A shared secret flickering between them, a silent communication that left me on the outside, looking in. It was the look of two people allied against a common, clueless adversary. Me. I pushed the thought away as quickly as it came. I was being paranoid. The stress of my job as a corporate lawyer was getting to me, making me see shadows where there were none. I was the rock, the steady hand. Rocks don't get paranoid. They don't imagine conspiracies at their own dinner table. I finished my meal in silence, the delicious food turning to ash in my mouth. Later that night, as I lay in bed beside Delilah, the thought returned. Her breathing was deep and even a picture of peaceful slumber. But the image of that look, that secret glance, was seared into my mind. How long had this been going on? This silent alliance? Was it just a mother's fierce, protective instinct? Or was it something more? I replayed the last few months in my head. The whispered phone calls Delilah would take in another room. Her vague explanations for nights out with the girls. Leo's sudden acquisition of expensive clothes that I knew he couldn't afford on his own. Each instance, on its own, was nothing. A tiny, insignificant detail. But woven together, they formed a tapestry of doubt. You're overthinking this, Elias, I told myself, turning onto my side to face away from her. You're tired, stressed. You built this life. It's real. It's solid. But even as I forced myself to believe it, I could feel the foundation shifting beneath me, a low, ominous rumble that promised an earthquake was coming. And I, the master architect of this perfect life, was about to discover it had all been built on sand. The incident that finally ripped away the blindfold, that forced me to see the gaping chasm beneath my feet, happened on a cold Tuesday night in November. I had just returned from a 3-day business trip to New York, a grueling series of depositions that had left me bone-tired and mentally frayed. All I wanted was to be home. I pictured Delilah waiting for me, perhaps with a glass of wine and that smile that, even after all these years, could still make my heart race. Instead, the house was quiet. Too quiet. The usual ambient noise of our life, the television humming in the background, music playing from the kitchen speaker, was absent. An unnerving stillness had settled over the rooms, the kind of silence that feels heavy, occupied. I found her in our bedroom. She was sitting on the edge of the bed, her back to the door, hunched over her phone. The soft glow of the screen illuminated her face, casting strange shadows in the dim light. She startled when I entered, a small, sharp gasp escaping her lips. Her fingers fumbled, and she quickly locked the screen, placing it face down on the nightstand. "Elias," she said, her voice a little too bright. "I didn't hear you come in." "Clearly," I said, setting down my suitcase with a heavy thud. A wave of exhaustion washed over me, mingled with a new, unpleasant prickle of suspicion. "Everything okay?" "Of course," she said, standing up and smoothing down her sweater. But her smile didn't reach her eyes. They were wide and guarded. "How was your trip?" "Productive. Exhausting. The usual." I moved toward her, leaning in to kiss her. It was a reflex, a motion I had repeated thousands of times. But this time, she turned her head slightly at the last second. My lips, which had expected the warmth and softness of hers, instead graced the cool skin of her cheek. It was a rejection so subtle, so swift, that I almost convinced myself I had imagined it. Almost. I pulled back, the space between us suddenly feeling like a mile-wide canyon. "Where's Leo?" I asked, changing the subject, trying to reset the strange energy in the room. "Study group," she replied quickly. A little too quickly. "He's been working so hard lately. Midterms are brutal." I nodded, pretending to believe her. But as I turned to unpack my suitcase, My eyes landed on something on the dresser that didn't belong. It was sitting next to Delilah's jewelry box, a stark, masculine object against the feminine clutter. A man's watch. And it was definitely not mine. I walked over and picked it up. It was heavy, substantial. A Rolex, if I had to guess, the steel cool and unforgiving against my skin. It was classic, expensive, and definitely new. "What's this?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm as I turned to face her. Delilah's face went pale. A flicker of pure panic crossed her features before she masked it. "Oh, that's Leo's," she stammered. "A gift from his grandfather." The lie was so audacious, so insulting to my intelligence, that for a moment I couldn't speak. "His grandfather has been dead for 5 years, Delilah," I said flatly. The memory of her tearful stories about her late father sharpened my mind. From before, she rushed to say, her words tumbling over each other. He just found it recently, in an old box." I turned the watch over in my hand, my fingers tracing the smooth metal, and then I saw it. An inscription on the back, etched in elegant script. "To Julian, with all my love." "Julian," I questioned, the name feeling foreign and bitter on my tongue. I held it up for her to see. "Who the hell is Julian?" It's a vintage piece," she said, snatching it from my hand with a sudden, jerky movement. Her voice was strained. "He bought it at a pawn shop. The inscription was already there. He thought it was cool." I just stared at her. At this woman I had shared my bed with for 12 years, this woman I had built my entire world around. I watched as she avoided my gaze, her eyes darting around the room, anywhere but at me. The lie was so transparent, so pathetically constructed, that it felt like a physical blow. She didn't even have the decency to craft a believable deception. She thought I was that much of a fool. "Delilah," I finally said, my voice dropping to a low, chilling whisper. "Do you think I'm an idiot?" "Elias, please. Is there someone else?" The question I never thought I would have to ask tore from my throat. "No," she protested, her denial immediate and forceful. Too forceful. "How could you even ask me that?" My control snapped. "Because there's a strange man's watch in our bedroom," I said, my voice rising despite my efforts to contain it. "Because you flinched when I tried to kiss you. Because there's a goddamn inscription with another man's name on it." "You're overreacting," she insisted, her voice taking on that placating tone she always used when she thought I was being unreasonable. The tone that suddenly felt condescending, manipulative. "It's exactly what I said it is. A silly gift Leo bought for himself." I wanted to believe her. God, how I wanted to believe her. To rewind the last 10 minutes, to unsee the watch, to unhear the lie. But the seed of doubt, planted by months of strange glances and whispered conversations, had been watered with the poison of this moment. And I knew, with a certainty that settled like a block of ice in my stomach, that it would grow into something far more devastating than I could have ever imagined. That night, sleep was an impossibility. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the inscription, "To Julian, with all my love." The words mocked me, danced behind my eyelids. Delilah lay beside me, feigning sleep, but I could sense the tension in her body, the shallow rhythm of her breathing. I waited. I lay perfectly still for what felt like hours, listening until her breaths finally deepened into the steady, rhythmic cadence of genuine sleep. Then, with the careful, deliberate movements of a bomb disposal expert, I reached over to the nightstand and picked up her phone. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was a line I had never crossed, a violation of the trust I thought we shared. But that trust was already a casualty, lying shattered on the floor of our bedroom. She had changed her passcode recently. I knew because the old one, our anniversary, didn't work. I tried my birthday. Nothing. I tried hers. Blocked for 1 minute. My mind raced. What would be simple? What would be meaningful to her? And then it hit me, a sickening jolt of intuition. I typed in the numbers, 0424. Leo's birthday. The phone unlocked. The irony, so cruel and so perfect, wasn't lost on me. The evidence was right there in her messages. A digital confession of her betrayal. Hundreds of texts to someone saved in her contacts simply as J. I started scrolling. my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. The messages were intimate, explicit, full of shared jokes and private endearments that made my stomach churn. They painted a picture of a deep, passionate relationship that had been happening right under my nose. There were plans for their Vermont getaway, which was clearly intended to be a romantic rendezvous, not a family vacation. And most disturbing of all, there were messages about me. How they would handle the Elias situation. How they needed to be more careful. That Elias was getting suspicious. But the real shock, the blow that knocked the air from my lungs, came when I opened her email. There in her inbox was a confirmation for a hotel reservation in Stowe, Vermont. A luxurious suite at a private lodge. The reservation was not under her name. It was under the name Julian Thompson. Julian, the name from the watch. My blood ran cold. I scrolled through more emails, my world narrowing to the sickly glow of the small screen. There were exchanges between Delilah and this Julian. Love letters, essentially. He wrote about their future together, about how much he missed her when they were apart, about how he couldn't wait to make things official. And then I found it. A photo attached to an email from the previous December when I had been on a business trip to Chicago. The subject line was, "Our little family." I clicked it open. There they were. Delilah, Leo, and a man I didn't recognize, tall, silver-haired, distinguished-looking, standing in front of a massive Christmas tree. They were smiling, arms around each other, beaming at the camera like a perfect family portrait. Leo's arm was slung casually over Julian's shoulder. Delilah was looking at Julian with an expression of pure adoration I hadn't seen on her face in years. The betrayal was so complete, so meticulously orchestrated, that I felt physically ill. I barely made it to the bathroom before emptying the contents of my stomach into the toilet, my body convulsing with violent, silent sobs. When I finally returned to the bedroom, shaking and hollowed out, Delilah was still asleep, her face peaceful, innocent. I looked at her, really looked at her, and wondered how much of the last 12 years had been a lie. Had she ever loved me? Or was I just a convenient provider, a stable placeholder until something better, or someone from her past came along? I didn't confront her that night. I needed time. I needed to think. I needed a plan. This wasn't just about a cheating spouse. This was about a coordinated deception involving her son, my son, I had thought, and this phantom Julian, who had apparently been a part of their lives for a very long time. As I lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, one thought echoed in my mind. My life as I knew it was over, and I had no idea what to do next. The next morning, I moved through our home like a ghost haunting the ruins of a life I no longer recognized. I pretended everything was normal. It was the hardest performance of my life. I showered in the master bathroom, the scent of Delilah's lavender body wash now cloying and offensive. I put on one of my best suits, the expensive fabric feeling like a costume. I knotted my tie with steady hands, a stark contrast to the maelstrom churning inside me. I kissed Delilah goodbye as I left for work. It was a brief, bloodless kiss on the cheek, and I felt a repulsive jolt as my lips touched her skin. "Have a good day," she said, her eyes still holding a hint of the previous night's fear. "You too," I replied, my voice a hollow echo of its usual warmth. Inside, I was seething. My mind was a chaotic race of questions and scenarios, each more painful than the last. But my legal training, the very discipline that had afforded us this life of comfort, now served a different purpose. It was a dam holding back the flood of raw, destructive emotion. Rage leads to mistakes. A premature confrontation would give her time to hide assets, to delete evidence, to spin a narrative that would paint me as the unstable, paranoid husband. No, this would be handled with the same cold, methodical precision I brought to a high-stakes corporate litigation. This was no longer a marriage. It was a case to be won. As soon as I got to my office, I closed the door, leaned my head against the cool wood, and took a deep, shuddering breath. Then I picked up my phone and called my old college roommate, Finn. We had navigated cheap beer and impossible philosophy classes together, and in the years since, he'd funneled that sharp, inquisitive mind into a career as a private investigator. If anyone could give me answers, it was him. "Elias, buddy," he said when we met for lunch at a discreet, dark paneled bar downtown, the kind of place where conversations disappear into the mahogany. You look like hell. I feel like it, I admitted, the words scraping my throat. And then, in a low, urgent torrent, I told him everything. The distant behavior, the watch, the late-night text messages, the email, the photograph. I laid out the facts as I knew them, the lawyer in me presenting the case, while the husband in me felt every word like a fresh wound. Finn listened without interruption, his expression growing grimmer by the minute. He took a long, slow sip of his water when I finished. His eyes, usually full of easy humor, were hard and serious. He sighed heavily. "I'll help you," he said, his voice firm. "But you need to prepare yourself. In my experience, what you found is probably just the tip of the iceberg." He was right, of course. He was devastatingly right. Within a week, Finn had compiled a dossier that would have made the CIA proud. He delivered it to my office after hours, a simple manila folder that felt as heavy as a tombstone. "Sit down, Elias," he said gently, and I knew the news was bad. I opened the folder, and my meticulously constructed world crumbled to dust. "Julian Thompson," Finn began, pointing to a crisp headshot of the silver-haired man from the photo. "He's a renowned cardiologist at a major Boston hospital. Divorced, wealthy, and according to my sources, has been seeing Delilah for at least 2 years. 2 years, I repeated, the words numb on my lips. My mind struggled to process it. 2 years of anniversaries celebrated, of vacations taken, of I love yous whispered in the dark. All of it a lie. That's impossible. I would have known. People see what they want to see," Finn said, not unkindly. "And from what my contacts at the hospital say, they haven't exactly been discreet. Staff there knows her as his girlfriend. The humiliation was a physical thing, a hot flush that crawled up my neck. I was the clueless husband, a walking cliché. And Leo," I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "How does he fit into this?" Finn hesitated, his gaze dropping to the file. "That's where it gets weird and ugly." He took a breath. "Leo has been presenting Julian as his father to his friends at college. Not his stepfather, his actual father." The air left my lungs. It was a blade twisting in a wound I hadn't even known was there. The boy I had taught to ride a bike, the boy whose homework I had checked every night, the boy for whom I had attended every parent-teacher conference and baseball game, the boy I had loved as my own. He had been actively erasing me from his life, replacing me with this stranger. "There's more," Finn said, his voice heavy with reluctance. I looked at him, my eyes burning. What more could there possibly be? "Julian Thompson isn't just some man she met, Elias." Finn looked me straight in the eye, delivering the final, catastrophic blow. "He's Leo's biological father." The room went silent. The tick of the clock on my wall sounded like a sledgehammer. Biological father. The story Delilah had told me when we first met, that Leo's father had been a brief college romance. A man who died in a car accident when Leo was 5 was a complete fabrication. The very foundation of our family, the narrative that had made me Leo's sole father figure, was a lie. "But," she told me. "She lied," Finn said simply. I felt the room begin to spin. This wasn't just an affair. This was a long-lost love story, a family reunited at my expense. I wasn't just the husband, I was the obstacle. The convenient, stable, wealthy obstacle who had been funding the life of another man's son while he waited in the wings. And then Finn delivered the final, disgusting detail that turned my grief into pure, cold rage. "They have a joint bank account, Elias, Julian and Delilah. And Mark has been paying for Leo's tuition at Boston University." "That's impossible," I said, shaking my head in disbelief. "I pay his tuition. I've seen the bills. I write the checks every semester." "You've seen bills," Finn corrected gently, sliding a bank statement across the desk. "But they aren't for BU. They're falsified invoices for a community college in a different state. They've been siphoning money from you for years, buddy. Delilah's been presenting you with fake invoices, and you've been writing checks that go straight into their joint account." The scope of the deception was breathtaking. This wasn't a crime of passion. This was a long con. A systematic, calculated exploitation of my trust, my love, and my finances. They hadn't just betrayed me, they had robbed me. They had used my love for a boy I thought of as my son as a weapon against me. I stared at the paperwork, at the undeniable proof of their scheme, and the sorrow that had been choking me began to harden into something else. Something cold and sharp. Resolve. "What do I do now?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "That depends," Finn replied, his eyes full of a grim sympathy. "What do you want out of this?" It was a good question. What did I want? Revenge? Justice? Or just an end to the suffocating charade? I looked up from the folder, the face of the man who had stolen my life staring back at me. "I want the truth to come out," I said finally, my voice gaining strength. "And then I want them out of my life. For good." Finn nodded slowly. "Then you need to be smart. Gather every piece of evidence, secure your assets, and confront them on your terms, in your time." And that's exactly what I did. Over the next 2 weeks, I became a different person. The loving husband was gone, replaced by a strategist. I moved significant funds to new accounts that Delilah couldn't access. I made copies of the fraudulent invoices and the bank statements Finn had provided. I consulted with the best divorce attorney in the state, a shark I'd faced in court before. He assured me that while our state was no fault, the documented financial fraud would give me immense leverage in any settlement. I was no longer a victim waiting for the next blow to fall. I was a man preparing for war, and I would make sure that when the battle came, I would be the one left standing. The confrontation came sooner than I had planned. Fate, it seems, has a flair for dramatic timing. It was a Friday evening in early December. A light, wet snow was beginning to fall, dusting the streets of our pristine neighborhood in a layer of white. I'd left the firm early, a rare occurrence, feeling the weight of my double life pressing down on me. The strain of pretending, of smiling at Delilah while my mind cataloged her betrayals, was becoming unbearable. I needed the quiet of my home office, the solitude of my own space. As I turned onto our street, my headlights cut through the swirling snow and landed on a car parked in our driveway. It wasn't Delilah's SUV or Leo's sedan. It was a sleek, black Mercedes, the kind of car that exudes an aura of quiet, arrogant wealth. Even from a distance, I could see the personalized license plates. Dr. J. Thompson. My blood turned to ice in my veins. He was here, in my house. The audacity was so profound, so utterly contemptuous, that it momentarily paralyzed me. For a full minute, I just sat in my car at the end of the driveway, the engine humming softly, watching the warm, welcoming lights of my home. My heart pounded a frantic, heavy rhythm against my ribs. This was it, the moment of truth. The carefully constructed battle plan I had been devising was just rendered obsolete. The war had just come to my front door. A cold, terrifying calm settled over me. The anger that had been simmering for weeks cooled into something harder, sharper. I put the car in park, killed the engine, and got out. Each step I took up the stone walkway felt deliberate, final. I entered the house quietly, using my key. The sound of soft jazz music and laughter guided me toward the kitchen. And there they were. The picture of domestic bliss, straight from the photograph in the email. My wife, Delilah. The boy I had raised, Leo. And the man I now knew to be Julian Thompson. They were cooking dinner together. Julian, in a ridiculously expensive-looking cashmere sweater, was chopping vegetables with the casual competence of a man at home in any kitchen. Leo was leaning against the counter, laughing at something he'd said. And Delilah. Delilah was standing between them, a wine glass in her hand, her face glowing with a happiness I hadn't seen in years. She looked radiant. She looked in love. They looked like a perfect little family. Delilah saw me first. The color drained from her face, her joyful expression dissolving into a mask of pure horror. The wine glass slipped from her numb fingers, shattering on the tiled floor and spattering red wine like blood across the pristine white grout. "Elias," she gasped, her voice thin and strangled. You're home early." "Clearly," I said. My voice was surprisingly steady, devoid of the tremor I felt deep in my bones. I let my gaze drift from her stricken face to Leo's look of panicked guilt, and finally to the man who had invaded my life. "Am I interrupting something?" Julian Thompson, to his credit, looked deeply uncomfortable. He set down the knife and stepped forward, wiping his hands on a dish towel as if this were a normal social call. He extended a hand. "Mark Thompson," he said, his voice smooth and professional. "I've heard a lot about you." I ignored his hand, letting it hang in the air between us. "I bet you have," I said, my eyes locking with his. "Tell me, Julian, how long have you been sleeping with my wife?" "Elias," Delilah hissed, her shock turning to frantic damage control. "This isn't 2 years," I continued, my voice cutting through hers like glass. My gaze never left Julian's. "That's what my sources tell me. 2 years of sneaking around, of lying to my face. 2 years of stealing my money." I finally turned my cold fury on Delilah. "Does that sound about right?" Leo moved to stand beside his mother, a protective gesture that was about 12 years too late. "You don't understand," he started. "Oh, I understand perfectly," I said, my voice lashing out at him. The pain of his specific betrayal was the sharpest of all. "I understand that I have raised you since you were 7 years old. I have paid for every private school, every summer camp, every want and every need you have ever had. I loved you like a son." I took a step closer, my voice dropping to a low, venomous snarl. "And this is how you repay me? By conspiring with your mother behind my back? By pretending this man is your father? And by helping her defraud me of thousands of dollars?" "It's not like that," Delilah insisted, her eyes pleading. "Julian and I, we have a history. He's Leo's biological father." She said it, the final, devastating truth, spoken aloud in the ruins of our kitchen. The revelation, even though I knew it was coming, hit me like a physical blow. I felt the air rush out of me. "What?" I asked, forcing the word out, wanting to hear her say it again, wanting to see if she would finally stop lying. "I was going to tell you," she continued, tears now welling in her eyes, the practiced tears of a performer. "When the time was right, Julian and I were together before you and I met. He's Leo's real father." I looked at Leo, really looked at him, and suddenly the resemblance I had never allowed myself to see was glaringly obvious. The same strong jawline, the same deep-set eyes. The pieces of the puzzle clicked into place with horrifying clarity. "His biological father has been dead since he was 5, I said, recalling the carefully crafted story she had sold me all those years ago. "A car accident." "That's what you told me." "I lied," she admitted, the words a quiet confession of a decade of deceit. "Julian and I were young. It didn't work out. He wasn't ready for a family. But he came back into our lives 2 years ago, and things changed. So, the past 12 years of my life have been based on a lie," I said, the reality of it crashing down on me. "You lied about Leo's father. You've been cheating on me. You've been stealing from me." I looked directly into her eyes, demanding one final piece of truth from the wreckage. "Tell me, Delilah, was any of it real? Did you ever love me at all?" "Of course I did," she insisted, stepping toward me, her hand outstretched. "I do love you, Elias. It's complicated." "No," I said, taking a step back from her touch, as if from a flame. "It's not complicated. It's actually very simple." My voice was cold, stripped of all emotion. "You are a liar and a thief, and I want you out of my house." I looked from her to Leo. "Both of you." "You can't just throw us out," Leo protested, his voice a mixture of defiance and fear. "We live here too." "Actually, I can," I replied, the lawyer in me taking over. "The house is in my name only. You have until morning to pack your things and leave. Anything left behind will be considered abandoned property and disposed of accordingly." "Elias, please," Delilah begged, tears now streaming down her face. "Let's talk about this. We can work it out." "There is nothing to work out," I said, my voice final. "You've made your choice. Now you have to live with it." I turned my attention to Julian, who had been watching the entire exchange in stunned silence. "Congratulations, Doc. They're all yours now. I hope you're ready for what you're getting." I gestured toward Delilah and Leo, a woman who lies as easily as she breathes, and a boy who's been taught that loyalty and integrity mean nothing. "Now, wait just a minute," Julian began, stepping forward as if to defend their honor. No, you wait. I cut him off, my voice raw with the fury I had held back for so long. For 2 years, you have been coming into my home, sleeping with my wife, and playing daddy to the boy I raised. You don't get to say anything to me. You don't get to defend yourself or them. You get to leave my property right now before I call the police and have you removed for trespassing. To my surprise, Julian didn't argue. He held up his hands in a gesture of surrender. He nodded, a look of what might have been grudging respect in his eyes. I understand you're upset, he said. You have every right to be. I'll go. He turned to Delilah. Call me later. And just like that, he left, closing the front door softly behind him. An uncomfortable, suffocating silence filled the kitchen, punctuated only by Delilah's quiet sobs. The storm had broken, and in its wake, there was only devastation. I didn't sleep in our bed that night. I couldn't. I retreated to the guest bedroom at the far end of the hall, a sterile, impersonal space that felt appropriate for the stranger I had become in my own home. I sat by the window, watching the snow fall, each delicate flake a silent witness to the demolition of my life. I didn't sleep. I just waited for the dawn. Sometime after the sun had risen, casting a pale gray light over the snow-covered world, I heard movement downstairs. The heavy tread of footsteps on the stairs, the scrape of cardboard boxes being dragged across the hardwood floors, the muffled, tear-choked murmur of their voices. I remained in the guest room, a self-imposed exile. There was nothing left to say. The battle was over. Now came the grim task of clearing the battlefield. Around noon, the sound ceased. A profound silence settled over the house, deeper and more final than the night before. Then, a light knock on the guest room door. Elias, Delilah's voice, tentative and broken. We're leaving now. I didn't respond. I just stared out the window at the stark, black branches of the oak tree against the white snow. I know you don't believe me, she continued, her voice trembling through the wood of the door. But I did love you. I still do. It's just, Julian is Leo's father. He has a right. Her voice trailed off, the weakness of her own excuse finally silencing her. Still, I said nothing. After a long moment, she spoke again, her voice resigned. I've left the house keys on the kitchen counter, and I'm sorry for everything. Her footsteps retreated down the hall. A few minutes later, I heard the heavy front door open and close, the click of the latch echoing through the empty house like a gunshot, the final sound of my old life ending. I waited another hour before venturing downstairs. The house felt different, larger, emptier, but somehow lighter too, as if a great pressure had been released from its very foundations. In the kitchen, as promised, sat her keys. Beside them was an envelope with my name on it in her familiar, looping script. Inside was a letter. I read it standing there, in the kitchen where our sham family had shared its last meal. Elias, by the time you read this, we will be gone. I know you hate me right now, and you have every right to. What I did was unforgivable, and I won't insult you by asking for forgiveness. The truth is, I never planned for any of this to happen. When Julian came back into our lives, it was supposed to be just for Leo's sake. But old feelings resurfaced, and before I knew it, we were caught up in something I couldn't control. That doesn't excuse what I did. Nothing could. I betrayed your trust in the worst possible way, and for that, I am truly sorry. You were a good husband and an even better stepfather to Leo. He may not show it now, but your influence on him has been profound. I know this doesn't change anything, but I wanted you to know that the past 12 years weren't a complete lie. I did love you, in my own way. You gave me stability when I needed it most, and I will always be grateful for that. I've left all the financial documents on the desk in your office. You'll see that I've transferred back all the money that we took. It doesn't make up for the deception, but it's a start. I hope that someday, maybe you could find a way to stay in Leo's life. He needs you, even if he doesn't realize it yet. Goodbye, Elias. Delilah. I read the letter twice, then slowly, deliberately, crumpled it in my fist. The audacity, the sheer, breathtaking nerve of her to ask me, after everything, to remain a fixture in her son's life. The money wasn't an apology. It was a desperate attempt to mitigate her guilt, and perhaps her legal jeopardy. It didn't erase the crime, it just confirmed it. I went to my office and found, as she had said, a stack of financial documents, bank statements showing transfers back into my accounts. A signed confession. I called my lawyer immediately. "This changes things," he said after I explained. "It's an admission of guilt. We can use this to press charges for fraud if you want to." "I don't want to press charges," I said, the words surprising even myself. "I just want this to be over." The months that followed were a blur of legal paperwork and hollow days. True to his word, my lawyer expedited the divorce. Delilah didn't contest anything. She didn't ask for alimony or a share of the house. She simply signed the papers and vanished. It was about 6 months later when my doorbell rang. I opened it to find Leo standing on my porch. He looked thinner, his youthful arrogance replaced by a subdued, haunted look. The expensive clothes were gone, replaced by a worn-out university sweatshirt. "Can I come in?" he asked, his voice uncertain. I hesitated for a fraction of a second, then stepped aside. He walked into the house, looking around the living room as if seeing it for the first time. "Why are you here, Leo?" I asked, my voice flat. He sat on the edge of the couch, his hands clasped nervously between his knees. I messed up," he said, his gaze fixed on the floor. "I know that. What we did to you, what I did to you, it was wrong." "Yes," I agreed coolly. "It was. Julian, he isn't what I thought he would be," Leo continued, his voice cracking. "He's controlling. Everything has to be his way. And Mom, she's different with him. Smaller, somehow." He finally looked up at me, his eyes pleading. "I missed a semester, couldn't focus. And now I can't go back. Julian says if I'm not going to take it seriously, he's not going to waste his money on it." "That's unfortunate," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "I don't know what to do," he said, the words a quiet, desperate admission. I thought, maybe you could help me, just to get back on my feet." The request hung in the air between us, bold and stunning in its presumption. After everything that had happened, after the lies, the theft, the utter denial of my place in his life, he still expected me to step in and fix things. He still saw me as the provider, the ever-reliable bank of Elias. And in that moment, something inside me, something that had been broken and bleeding for months, finally healed into a hard, unbreakable scar. "No," I said. The word was quiet, but it landed with the force of a slammed door. He stared at me, his mouth slightly agape. "No?" he repeated, as if he couldn't have heard me correctly. "No, Leo," I said, my voice firm. "I'm not going to help you. Not this time, not anymore. But you always." "That was before." I cut him off, standing up. "Before you lied to me. Before you helped your mother steal from me. Before you stood in my kitchen and allowed another man to be called your father while I paid your bills. I was your ATM and a placeholder. Nothing more." "I was confused," he protested, his voice rising. "Julian showed up and suddenly I had this biological father who wanted to be in my life. What was I supposed to do?" "You were supposed to be honest," I said, my voice like steel. "You were supposed to have an ounce of the integrity I tried to teach you. You were supposed to come to me, as a man, and tell me what was happening. Instead, you chose deception. You chose to hurt me. Intentionally." "I'm sorry," he whispered, and for the first time I believed the words might be genuine. "I really am." "You're right," I agreed. "It doesn't change anything. You made your choice, Leo. You chose Julian. Now you have to live with that decision." "So that's it?" he asked, disbelief warring with despair in his eyes. 12 years, and you're just done? Just like that?" "I was just the guy paying the bills," I reminded him gently, using his own logic against him. "That's what you and your mother made very clear. I wasn't your father." He flinched as if I'd struck him. He stood, his shoulders slumped in defeat. At the door, he turned back. "I really am sorry, Elias, for everything." "I know," I said. "So am I." After he left, I poured myself a drink and sat in the profound silence of the house. I felt a strange mixture of emotions, a deep, aching sadness for the boy I had loved so fiercely, A surge of relief at having finally stood my ground, and an unexpected liberating sense of closure. The divorce was finalized a week later. The following month, I put the house on the market. It sold in a day. I packed up the remnants of my life, discarding anything that reminded me of Delilah and Leo, and moved into a sleek, minimalist condo downtown, closer to the office, with panoramic views of the city skyline. It was a new view, a new life, a life that was, for the first time in a long time, entirely my own. The healing had begun. Absolutely. Here is the final chapter of Elias's story, bringing his journey to a close. Time, in its relentless forward march, began to do its work. The sharp, jagged edges of betrayal slowly softened. I threw myself into my work with a singular focus, billing more hours than ever before, and made partner at the firm within the year. The emptiness of my condo was gradually filled with new routines, new furniture that held no memories, and the occasional, tentative foray into the world of dating. The women I met were lovely, accomplished, and intelligent, but a part of me remained walled off, a fortress built from the rubble of my past. The scars of Delilah's deceit ran deep, a constant, silent reminder to be cautious. About a year and a half after I had closed the door on Leo for the last time, I heard through the grapevine of mutual acquaintances that Delilah and Julian had split. His fortune, it turned out, was not as stable as his tailored suit suggested. There were gambling debts and bad investments. She had moved to a small apartment in a less desirable part of town. I heard that Leo, seeking the structure and purpose that had been so lacking in his life, had joined the army. I felt a flicker of something, not satisfaction, not vindication, just a hollow acknowledgement of another chapter closing. Their relationship, built on the unstable ground of deceit, had inevitably collapsed under its own weight. 3 years after the divorce, my life changed again. It happened at a charity gala for the Boston Children's Hospital, an event I typically would have avoided. But a senior partner had insisted I attend. It was there, amidst the clinking of champagne glasses and the drone of polite conversation, that I met Clara. She was a pediatric surgeon, introduced to me by a mutual colleague. She was brilliant and kind, with a dry, wry sense of humor that caught me completely off guard. She had warm, intelligent eyes that seemed to see right through the carefully constructed facade I presented to the world. We started slowly, coffee, then dinner, then weekend excursions to the Cape, walking along the windswept beaches as we talked for hours. Clara had been married before, to a fellow doctor who had died in a car accident several years prior. She had no children, no complicated family dynamics, just a straightforward honesty that was as refreshing as a cool breeze after years of suffocating deception. "You've been hurt before," she observed one night, as we shared a bottle of wine on my balcony, the city lights glittering below us like a carpet of fallen stars. "Badly." "Is it that obvious?" I asked, a wry smile touching my lips. "Only to someone who's been hurt too," she replied softly. "It's in the way you hold back. The way you question kindness, as if you're waiting for the other shoe to drop." And so, for the first time, I told someone the whole story. I didn't spare the humiliating details or the depth of the pain. She listened without judgment, her hand resting gently on mine. "I'm sorry, Elias," she said when I finished, and I could tell she meant it. "That's a long time to build a life with someone, only to have it torn down." "It was," I agreed. "But I'm making peace with it, or trying to at least." Clara looked at me, her gaze steady and clear. "For what it's worth," she said, "I'm not her. I don't have any secrets, no hidden agendas. What you see is what you get." "That's worth a lot," I told her, squeezing her hand, and for the first time in years, I allowed myself to hope. Our relationship deepened over the next year. Clara moved into my condo, filling its minimalist spaces with warmth, laughter, and an absurd number of plants. We talked about marriage, about a future, about the possibility of a family. The walls I had built around my heart began to crumble, not from a forceful assault, but from her patient, persistent kindness. 2 years into our marriage, Allison gave birth to our daughter, Emily. Holding her in my arms for the first time, feeling the perfect, trusting weight of her tiny body against my chest, I finally understood what it meant to be a father. Not a substitute, not a stand-in, not a provider playing a role. The real thing. My love for her was fierce, pure, and uncomplicated by the ghosts of the past. Life has a way of coming full circle. Last month, on a quiet Tuesday evening, I received a letter with a postmark from a small town in Colorado. The return address just said, L. Thompson. I opened it with a strange sense of detachment. He was married now, with a son of his own. The letter was brief, the handwriting neat and controlled. Elias. I've thought about writing this letter for years, never sure if it would be welcome. I hope it is. I want to thank you. For the years you spent raising me, I was too young and too selfish to appreciate what you gave me then. But now that I have a son of my own, I understand. I find myself teaching him things you taught me: how to be patient, how to be fair. You showed me what it means to be a man of integrity, even when I was doing my best to reject those lessons. What my mother and I did to you was unforgivable. I know that. I'm not asking for forgiveness or for a place in your life again. I just wanted you to know that the values you tried to instill in me, honesty, responsibility, respect, they did take root eventually. It just took me a long, hard time to recognize their worth. I hope you're well. I hope you found happiness. You deserve it more than anyone I know. Sincerely, Leo. I read the letter several times. My emotions a complex mix of pride, regret, and a strange, unexpected peace. I showed it to Clara that night after Emily was asleep. She read it, then looked at me, her eyes soft. Are you going to respond? She asked. I thought about it, about all the water under the bridge, all the hurt and betrayal, but I also thought about the boy I had loved and the man he was trying to become. The man he was becoming in part because of me. Yes, I decided, a sense of clarity settling over me. I think I will. I sat down and wrote back to Leo. I didn't write to absolve him or his mother of what they had done. I didn't write to reopen old wounds. I wrote to acknowledge his growth, to tell him I was proud of the man he had become, despite the turbulent example set by his parents. I told him about Clara and about his half-sister Emily. I wished him and his new family well. In the end, I learned that the greatest revenge wasn't in holding on to bitterness or in watching them suffer the consequences of their actions. It was in moving forward. It was in building a life of truth and love, in finding a profound happiness that grew from the ashes of my deepest wounds. The betrayal that once defined me is now just a chapter in a much longer, much happier story. A story that continues to unfold, page by page, day by day, in the beautiful, honest, and wonderfully real life I have built. A life where trust is the foundation, not the illusion. And as I watch Clara read a bedtime story to our daughter, her voice a gentle murmur in the quiet of our home, I know, with a certainty that fills every part of me, that I am finally where I was always meant to be.